Hey, everybody, and welcome to this 4th of July special edition Speechless. I hope you guys are having a wonderful 4th of July. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm gonna cover exactly what we're gonna get into today after this. Welcome to Speechless. I'm your host, Phares, for The Daily Show. So I am recording this the day before the 4th of July simply because I don't want to have to come into the studio tomorrow, which is technically today as you're watching this. But here's what I'm going to do, because I'm obviously enjoying my holiday as much as I hope you guys are. And if you did not get a chance to see my live stream from Sunday, I had a constitutional attorney and author, David Shestokas, on, who talked about the significance of Independence Day and why we really celebrate this holiday. And while it's a lot of fun to shoot off fireworks, have a barbecue, spend time with your family, we need to recognize the historical significance of the founding of the greatest nation on the face of this planet and the signing of the Declaration of Independence, what it really means and the words it says. So I'm going to play for you guys, in case you missed it, my discussion with David Shestokas about that very topic. Here is that from last Sunday. If you want to watch the full live stream, it is in the comments. I left the link there. And do not forget to like, subscribe, and share for more content like this. Everybody have a wonderful 4th of July, and thank you for tuning in. We also are in 4th of July week. We're in 4th of July week, and I'm saying that this is the real Pride Month, everybody. The real Pride Month, American Pride Month, and that is what July should be about. And so to talk about just American pride and what July 4th actually is about. Like, we are almost 250s away from when this country was founded, when Thomas Jefferson wrote and signed the Declaration of Independence with our other founding fathers. And honestly, I can't tell you all about it. I want to be a constitutional attorney, but I'm still in my application process for law school. And so I have a guest with me, David Shestokas. David is an expert in constitutional law, also former candidate for attorney general and an author. David, so great to have you on today.
I'm so happy to be with you, Kevin. It's great to be back on Cities 92.9. It's one of my favorite places to be. I enjoy my time often with Kat. I have a great time with Kat. I have a great time with David. And I'm so happy for the very first time. This is my virgin visit to your show.
Yeah, well, and I think it's so very timely, especially with July 4th coming up. We were talking off air before the show, or before this hour, talking about everything. I mean, you know, the historical context, the 5 weeks leading up to July 4th and what actually was happening. It's not all about, the holiday is not all about fireworks, backyard barbecues, and everything like that. There's so much more to it. And I want to remind our listeners what we are actually celebrating. So let's start with that. What are we actually celebrating when it comes to July 4th?
Well, we're actually celebrating perhaps the issuance of the most significant political document that was ever written in the history of the world. Is one of the better ways to put it. Of course, the United States came into being and was probably the very first country to ever have an actual birthday. It came into being. They actually passed a resolution in support of independence on the 2nd of July, 1776. And John Adams had, in fact, written a letter to Abigail saying that July 2nd will be commemorated throughout history by fireworks and games and sports all over the country from one end to the other. Of course, he was a little bit off by a couple of days, because while they passed the resolution on July the 2nd, they spent the next couple of days editing Thomas Jefferson's draft of the Declaration of Independence. And so ultimately they finished, the Continental Congress finished their edit job on the 4th of July. And a fellow by the name of John Dunlap took their draft that they finished up and what they ultimately officially adopted and published it. He ran off 250 copies of what they call Dunlap broadsheets, and those he dated July 4th. And that's how July 4th became the recognized date throughout the country and now throughout history, even though technically speaking, they passed the resolution and the independence was effective July the 2nd.
Gotcha. So, interesting.
So that happened actually on July 4th. They spent those couple of days doing what they cut out about 25% of what Thomas Jefferson had written. Thomas Jefferson said they spent those 2 days emasculating his draft of the Declaration of Independence, but it's turned out to be a a pretty good job of editing and turned out to be, as I said, perhaps the most single influential political document in the history of the world. And that's not really even overstating that at all, because since 1776, about 120 new countries have come into existence with the breakup of all the colonial empires and whatnot throughout Africa, the rest of the Americas, and over 100 of those countries came into the world by issuing a document modeled after the Declaration of Independence. And so when you say it's the most influential political document in the history of the world, that may almost be an understatement.
Yeah.
Because it really, really did. We can talk about that some more, but I think if we want to back up, this is one of my very favorite times of the year, because I wrote a few years back, I wrote a book called Creating the Declaration of Independence, which shameless plug.
Of course.
It's available on Amazon, both in print and in Kindle. And what Creating the Declaration of Independence does is it follows. It starts with Richard Henry Lee on June 7, 1776, follows him, and then John Adams, and then Thomas Jefferson from that day through July the 4th. Perhaps maybe the most consequential 4 weeks in the history of the country, because on June 7th, 1776, Richard Henry Lee proposed independence, and it's worth reading what the resolution that that Richard Henry Lee proposed. And if I could do that in a minute, because we were going to talk about. We'll talk about treason against the king in just a second. Yeah. But what Richard Henry Lee was authorized to do by the Virginia legislature was to present this resolution. And what he said was, resolved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, that it is expedient forthwith to take the most effectual measures for forming foreign alliances, that a plan of confederation be prepared and transmitted to the respective colonies for their consideration and approbation. This is what Richard Henry Lee proposed on June 7th, 1776. And strangely enough, there was about 50-some delegates to the Second Continental Congress. And that day, only John Adams stood up and stood with Richard Henry Lee. Nobody else did that. John Adams got up, he seconded the motion. And the Congress did what legislatures did before and legislatures have done since. When they don't want to mess with something, they said, let's form some committees.
Yeah.
We'll send this. We're going to send this off to a committee.
And I want to be clear with everybody out there too. So when John Adams stood up with Richard Henry Lee, what was he actually putting on the line? How monumental? What was the risk of actually standing up for that?
The risk was, and this is why nobody ever had said this in a public forum before. Nobody had ever made this proposition in a public forum before, because it was treason against the king. And the
punishment, and I know you talked about it, but the punishment for that was
the
exactly?
law on the books. The law on the books and the punishment for treason against the king was, in fact, the very first aspect of the punishment would be to have your gut open and your intestines cut out. And they would take out pieces of your intestines and leave your gut bleeding. Then they would drag you through the streets on what they called a sledge. It was just, they tie kind of a sled to some horses and drag you through the streets of town to the gallows. When you got to the gallows, then they would hang you. But they didn't hang you until you were dead. They just hang you enough to where you're kind of suffocating and of course you're bleeding out from your gut and you're suffocating. But they cut you down before you died, so that you were still alive when they would take your intestines and they would put them on a fire that they'd started, and you could watch your own intestines burn. Finally, mercifully, they would cut your head off.
Yeah. And it was all a spectacle, and it was for the purpose of showing everybody this is what happens if you go against the king. It wasn't just a death sentence. It was making a statement to everyone out there. And I want to talk a little bit more about the document itself, because you describe it, and a lot of people describe it this way, and I agree with you that it's that the Declaration of Independence, and then a lot of times people put the Constitution in there too, but the Declaration of Independence is the most influential political document in the history of the world. And then like maybe the only one after that would be like the Magna Carta or something. But what is it about the Declaration of Independence within the actual text? What are the most important pieces of it that make it such an influential document?
Well, if you hold that for just a second, I'm going to finish up on one point.
Gotcha.
Because you were asking about what was Adams putting on the line, and it's one thing to say that this is the penalty that's on the books. Okay, because I've been in the criminal justice system. I was a prosecutor, and then I've been doing criminal defense work. Very seldom does anybody get the very worst thing that's on the books, right? Yeah. But in the aftermath of Bunker Hill in April of 1775, the British soldiers went out and had what they called execution squads. And they went out and actually literally the surviving patriots that were on the battlefield, they went out and cut their heads off. And among the people that had his head cut off that day in April 1775 was a fellow by the name of Dr. Joseph Warren. Dr. Warren was a brigadier general in the Massachusetts militia. He was also the president of the Massachusetts legislature. And oddly enough, he was also the personal physician to the Adams family. And so John Adams and all the rest of the folks actually knew Dr. Warren because of his patriot activities. They actually knew somebody who had his head cut off. So this was not just a pie in the sky or just kind of thinking that it might be possible. They actually had known somebody who had their head cut off. Yeah. So this was extraordinary.
It became very real at that moment for them, right?
Yeah. 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 It was very, very real. And I think that's important to note that, we have the death penalty on the books in a lot of states.
And for treason, I believe one of the only thing that's not, I think the death penalty in a lot of states, it's treason or capital murder of some kind. And so we do have
some kind, treason. Actually, treason is, that's another historical interesting point. Treason is in fact the only crime that's defined in the Constitution.
Really?
Treason is actually a constitutional crime. So so it's just important before we move on about the document. I think it's important to note that they did this, and then of course when they did this, they knew what they were facing. They knew what they were facing, and it was real. It wasn't just something. It wasn't a meme with somebody's head dangling on a stick, but it wasn't some comedian holding up a Donald Trump head.
Yep.
This was actual reality that they were living.
So I do want to we have probably about a minute and a half to 2 minutes left in this segment, but I want to start talking about the document itself, the Declaration of Independence. So what specific, I mean, like obviously everybody knows right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's like the biggest thing and everything that's within that. But what more about it?
Yeah. And let's talk about that. Well, there's two seconds when I give talks about it. There's two separate phrases that I spend a great deal of time with. One of which is up in the front end, where they talk about it's time for the United States to assume its place among the powers of the world. And this is the key phrase: according to the laws of nature and of nature's God. They were creating a government. We hear people throw around the phrase, we're going to have the rule of law, right? Then nobody ever finishes that traditional part of that phrase where it's the rule of law, not the rule of men. So if you're going to have the rule of law and not the rule of men, you have to start someplace where the law is greater than man, that cannot be altered or changed by men. That it's immutable and it's eternal. And Jefferson starts in that place with the law of nature and of nature's God. The law of nature and nature's God is the actual legitimate theory for the existence of the United States. The United States doesn't exist without those 8 words.
Yeah.
And that's really, really crucial for people to understand. That's a place to begin. And Jefferson did something really important there too, because when he says the law of nature, we're talking about a situation where they recognize that there's some aspects of human nature, or there's things like gravity, right? There's things like gravity, there's things like mathematics that are immutable, that won't change, that just exist in nature. And for people that are not believers, they still recognize those things exist. On the other hand, for people that are in fact believers, they believe, and rightly so, that this was divinely inspired, and this was put together under the law of God.
Yep.
And
God-given rights. That's right in there. We do have to take a quick break, but we can keep this conversation going on our live stream. Everybody, if you're listening on the radio and you're not driving a car, you can go check us out on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, or Rumble and be able to see me and David talking right back and forth and watch us even throughout the break, having even more discussion. So everybody, we will be right back on the radio and app, though, with more Speechless on Cities 92.9, the news and talk of Bloomington Normal and beyond.
We'll continue. I think that's something, though, that everybody says, they're trying to kick God out of the country, but God is actually
enshrined. No, that's something I say all the time, is that and that's why I've always thought that the Declaration of Independence was so genius, and even in our Constitution and Bill of Rights as well, is simply for the basic fact that if no matter what you believe, whatever God you believe in, because technically the God stated in the Declaration of Independence, they never state a denomination, so it could be any higher power. And so having our rights derived from God and not the government is what made our revolution successful. I mean, in the French Revolution, they tried to say that the rights were granted to you by the government, at least as I understand it, and that's a big reason why they failed. They lost their own revolution, is because of that.
Right. No, it makes all the difference in the world, but it does make all the difference in the world if that's your starting place for the legitimacy of your government, because as we were talking about before, when everybody says the rule of law, that's all good, but if you don't have a starting place that's your guiding principle to begin with at the top, that men cannot alter, then all you do have is the rule of men.
Exactly.
All you have is Joe Biden saying you don't have to pay your loans.
Yep.
I mean, that's it. If you don't have something that's up there to begin with, and I think that's something that people miss. Of course, we don't teach the Declaration of Independence. Nobody studies the Declaration of Independence, which is a darn shame, because the Declaration is actually the inspiration. The Constitution is actually the execution, the mechanical execution of the Declaration of Independence. There's 20 some different what they call grievances in the Declaration of Independence. Among them is where they talk about the fact that they're taking colonies, or the citizens of the various colonies, and they take them back to England to have a trial, right? They complain about that in the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution says a criminal trial shall be held in the state and district where the crime occurred. That's in response to something in the Declaration of Independence. They talk about the Declaration of Independence talks about the quartering of soldiers in people's homes and whatnot.
And then that's our Fourth Amendment, right?
That's the Third Amendment.
Third Amendment.
The Third Amendment says you can't. Soldiers cannot be quartered in people's homes during peacetime without their consent.
Yep. We're coming back here, so I got to cut you off, but we're going to come back live here on the radio. Right now, having a great conversation about the true meaning of the 4th of July and why we actually celebrate it. The important documents, such as the Declaration of Independence, which is what we really celebrate on the 4th of July, and what it really means, its most important parts. David, thank you so much for coming on and for talking about all these things with me. We have been having a great conversation off air of furthering of why the Declaration is so important. And we talked a little bit about how our rights are derived from God, and how kind of unique that was to a document at the time that it was signed. Because never, I mean, for the most part, monarchies were the reigning of the land. There wasn't, and it was, or something like that.
Kevin,
So
for 10,000 years before the Declaration of Independence said all men are created equal, the presumption in human history had been that some men were born to rule over others. Whether it was a king, a shaman, a shah, an emperor, or a chief, whatever you want to call him, there was an assumption that some people were meant to rule over others. July 4th, 1776 turned 10,000 years of human history on its head. And for people to criticize these guys and go, oh, geez, just a bunch of white old slave owners, they don't understand what these guys set in motion.
Yeah.
What they changed, or what they were, the tide of history that they were running against when they did this. And so and of course up front, as we were talking about those particular 8 words that are so critical and crucial to the founding of the country, the law of nature and of nature's God. We have these other 55 words that should be known as the American Creed. You know, everybody, I'm sure you did, and just about is traditional, that they make you memorize the preamble to the Constitution, right? We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, ensure domestic tranquility, et cetera, et cetera. The truth is that mission statement for the Constitution has neither any legal effect, nor does it actually say anything in particular of any consequence. It's nice. It's friendly. I like it, and Lord knows we the people sounds like is a great place to start.
Well, and it's amazing. It's an amazing Schoolhouse Rock song too. So
yeah, it is an amazing Schoolhouse Rock song. They've been around long enough where I heard that when I was a kid.
Yep.
But there's 55 much more important words in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident: that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that governments are instituted among men to secure these rights, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Those 55 words are critical, are crucial. They were starting a country for the very first time that was going to be founded on an idea, on shared philosophy, rather than on just the power, just raw physical power, or tribal family ties, or the other kinds of ways that countries have been organized. This was the first time. And this is the statement. You heard Barack Obama fond of going, oh, well, that's not who we are as Americans. Did you ever hear the man say who we are as Americans? Who we are as Americans, what that defines is in those 55 words.
Yeah.
It's in those 55 words. You know, I could be, and this was the first time in human history that was put together. My English is pretty good. I speak English fairly well. I could go to London and live there for 20, 25 years, pledge allegiance to King is Charles, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Charles.
Yep.
And whatnot. I would never become British, right?
Nope.
But
I say this all the time. I could move to China. I could become a member of the Chinese Communist Party. I wouldn't be Chinese.
Right.
I could go to Africa. I'd never be African. But in America, anybody can come here and become an American.
And the critical thing through our history to becoming an American was to subscribe to those 55, the principles of those 55 words. It's for those of you who are either Catholic or Episcopal, they have what they call the Nicene Creed, right?
Yep.
We believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, et cetera, et cetera.
Creator of heaven and earth. Yep, I know.
Yeah, creator of heaven and earth, et cetera. Yeah, there you go.
I had to learn that in my Bible school.
Yeah, but that's what. But when you say we believe, that's what it means to be part of that group, right? That's what it means to be Catholic. That means what it means to be Episcopal, Methodist, whatever it is. You subscribe to those beliefs to be part of that group. Well, we hold these truths to be self-evident. That's what it means to be an American, is to subscribe to and share those beliefs. We've lost that. It's so, and because we don't teach that. Why we don't teach that, I'm going to get into in a moment or two.
Yep. I do have to take a break here, so that can be what we talk about in our next segment. Why have we lost that? Why have we lost what it truly means to be an American? Everybody stay tuned, because David Shestokas is going to answer it in the next segment on Speechless on Cities 92.9, the news and talk of Bloomington Normal and beyond. But what I can say is beautiful is this Tuesday, we've got July 4th. July 4th, it's American Pride Month, after the degeneracy of Pride Month that we had before this. And I have a great scholar, and I love talking to him because I always learn something new. David Shestokas, constitutional attorney and author and former candidate for Illinois Attorney General. And I think he's probably even doing better work outside of that role than he would have if he was in that, because we've been able to fight back on a lot of the crap policy that's going on in Illinois. We're going to get to that, but I want to start off. We've talked a lot about the Declaration of Independence, how unique it was, how influential it's been. But you say that America has strayed away from the 55 words that you had just mentioned regarding all men being created equal, or rights being endowed by our creator, everything like that. I don't know it. I'm not as scholarly as you. I don't have it memorized, but I know the gist of it.
I'm going to challenge you to the next time we get on. I'm going to challenge you and expect you to know those 55 words as well as I do.
I will.
And we will say them together.
I'll put it, it'll be part of my LSAT studying. I'll make sure.
There you go. There you go. Because I truly believe, I do believe this, Kevin, that if in fact we memorize those 55 words and ascribe to them, it would be much more difficult to slice us and dice us into all these little interest groups when they would understand that this is what it means to be an American. Now, as we were before the break, we were just about to make a transition to a situation why it is that we don't know the Declaration of Independence, why it's not taught, why it's not part and parcel of our civic life these days. Of course, unfortunately, we are dominated by, our education is dominated by, of course, public education. Public education, if you want to call it government education.
Yep.
What the last phrase of those 55 words is the consent of the governed. The next section of the Declaration of Independence indicates that, in fact, whenever a government fails to meet those needs, whenever it fails to ensure people's right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, whenever it fails to conduct itself according to the consent of the governed, it is the right, no, it is the duty of the people to alter or abolish that government and establish a government so as to effectuate the goals of meeting and protecting their rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. This is known, this section of the Declaration of Independence is known as describing what they call the right of revolution. Is a government school going to teach you that you and your neighbors and your friends and everybody else in the community, if the government's not meeting the protection of your rights, is a government school going to teach you that you have the right to alter or abolish it?
Yeah, it seems like a little strategic from our government to leave that out of our education. Very true. Very true. Interesting.
Yeah, this is why this is my belief why the Declaration of Independence is not, in fact, taught in our schools. It's a revolutionary document. It outlines everything that if a government doesn't do these things, if a government puts soldiers in your home, if a government executes warrants without probable cause, if it if it breaks all these laws, if it does taxation without representation, if it sends you away for trial in some place where you can't properly defend yourself. These are the reasons by which you have the right to overthrow the government. And so is the government going to teach you that? Hell no.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And so speaking of, is there anything else? Because I want to get to some of these Supreme Court cases, but anything else that you want to wrap up to talk about the importance of July 4th, the Declaration of Independence, being an American and how to celebrate the holiday?
I would celebrate the holiday the way they celebrated the 4th of July in 1776. And that was, they got everybody together. They opened up the Declaration of Independence and they read it to each other. I would do that for starters. That's a good place to start. We should know that when the final phrase, the final section of the Declaration of Independence is that in support of this declaration, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Those guys were, in fact, doing that. It was serious. One of these days, we'll come back and we'll talk about how Ben Franklin, the only rich old white guy of the bunch, or the richest old white guy of the bunch, was the head of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society.
Mm-hmm.
And that Thomas Jefferson drafted the Northwest Ordinance that outlawed slavery in the Northwest Territories, which included Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Minnesota. Without what those guys did, we probably wouldn't have won the Civil War.
Yeah.
So in any event, the consequences of what happened there are very important. Don't diss the founders. Don't judge them by by our current state, but judge them by what they did in relationship to how the world was. And it was just amazing what they put into motion. And that's what we need to celebrate. That's what we need to preserve. That's what we need to continue to work for. And that's something that, the Supreme Court of the United States did this last week.
Yeah. So there was my interview with David Shestokas. I hope you guys learned something. It's amazing how educational that man is. I really appreciate all the insight he has to give about how, an educated insight. He's an expert in the field of the Declaration of Independence, in the Constitution, in the founding documents, the most important political documents in the history of the world. He's an expert in them, and I hope you guys all learned something and got a little bit of a different perspective on why we celebrate this important holiday, July 4th, Independence Day. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your holiday. Make sure you have a beer for me if that's what you like to indulge in. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll be back later this week with more news on Speechless, The Daily Show. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you guys soon.